Well, it hasn't hit that hard because they saw a record number of IPOs on the financial sector. But you have to remember that Hong Kong has two separate economies. There's one which involves about 2 million people who are involved, very well paid at the financial sectors, things like that, lawyers, accountants. And then you have 5 million people who depend literally on the tourism, providing services, working for a lot of these companies which are owned by a handful of families who, incidentally, also control the real estate in that area. So right now, what the central government is responding to are these riots that were out of control, that were actually impacting this 5 million, group who were depending on, literally tourism, which had dried up due to the fact that they were having these violent marches.
And so the region faces 3 major elections within the next 12 months. What type of changes do you anticipate?
Well, they're not exactly, throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. What they're doing is simply asking that anybody who wants to serve has to have a loyalty oath. There are going to be some changes in terms of the selection process. Something very akin to the electoral college. People will be vetted and then put on there, and then they will select the candidate of choice. In terms of the loyalty oath, this is being made much of, but the fact is a loyalty oath is required in almost every single nation on earth, regardless of what system is involved. Standing up and saying that you will defend the country, its constitution, its legal order is required. And that is what is the fly in the ointment for a lot of these protesters who believe that Hong Kong should be independent of mainland China. That will not stand, would not stand in the US. If somebody decided that they were part of a radical group that wanted to overthrow the government and refused to take the loyalty oath, they would not be allowed into office. So nothing has really changed in that regard, but there is going to be a lot of consternation about this kind of intermediary step where people are vetted to make sure that they're not trying to overthrow the existing order.
And the central government basically describing this as an improvement to the electoral system, but then you hear the critics from the West saying that, this is going to be a blow to Hong Kong's autonomy. How do you address that?
Well, I mean, it's a legal issue. It's about the rule of law. There were supposed to be amendments, a security law, extradition laws. All of these things were supposed to be passed when Hong Kong came back into China's sphere when it was given up by the British. Now remember, the British never really allowed any kind of form of democracy except when they were about to leave. And for some in Beijing, they suspected that this was, in essence, trying to poison the well in terms of splitting the feelings of Hong Kong people away from the mainland. So at this point, the NPC, or National People's Congress, which has absolute jurisdiction over Hong Kong, that's not in debate, has simply moved in to make the necessary changes to the 2 annexes, not to the actual document, the laws, the basic laws, and they're in essence going to do that. Now, there will be continuing calls in the West. They'll say that somehow that Hong Kong is less independent, but the very nature of government means that it is responsible for maintaining public order. And right now, you could not, the difference between where Hong Kong is today and where it was a year ago, and for the past year before that, with these ongoing riots, violence in the streets. You had if you remember, cast back to when they were, in essence, fortifying a college campus and fighting with the police. That is not acceptable in any community. If it happened in the US or Europe, there would be swift action. It must be handed to the Hong Kong police that they showed so much restraint. No one was killed. The deaths were on the other side.